Welcome back to Close Up. This summer, the races for the congressional midterm are heating up, where we're going to be meeting a lot of new Republican candidates in the weeks ahead. But there is a familiar GOP face already in the race in the 2nd District, and that is Robert Burns, who is joining us this morning from his office in Bedford. Thanks for joining us, Bob.
Thank you for having me, Adam.
So first, you live right on the line between the 1st and 2nd District, and that line could very well be moving in the redistricting process. Why did you decide to pick CD2 over CD1 for your primary?
Well, I mean, number one, because I ran in CD2 before, so I really do want to run in as many towns as that I've run in before. Early on, there was a lot of discussion about, doing some major overhaul of the districts, but Governor Sununu has been on this program twice and said that's not going to happen. So I'm going to listen to what Governor Sununu says, and it looks like we're going full force in CD2.
What does it mean to be a conservative Republican right now, do you think? Because it seems like one of the defining aspects of being a part of the GOP right now is loyalty to President Donald Trump.
Yeah, sure. But I still think that you need to be a conservative. And we know what those things are: being pro-life, pro-gun, lower taxes, less government. Sure. Everybody wants to show their loyalty to Trump. We see this in countless race after race. I don't need to prove myself to Donald Trump. I was with him early on back in 2015, all through the primary, and I've always been a supporter of his.
But you can be all of those things and check all of those boxes, but if you're not pro-Trump, you kind of got to be quiet now these days. Is that fair?
Well,
is that right?
Yeah, I think saying pro-Trump is a little bit of a misnomer. I mean, you see certain candidates out there and they always want to agree with Donald Trump on everything that he does. But I'm going to tell you the first thing about Donald Trump is he doesn't even always agree with himself. He can change his mind, as we've seen through a number of people that he brought into the administration. He didn't end up being happy with. And I think it's important to have candidates like myself, who were early Trump supporters, who can still disagree with him at times because we don't think that he's making the right decisions. And I don't think that that means that you're not pro-Trump or you're anti-Trump. I just think it means that we don't all agree 100% of the time.
Congress you'd like to join. There's an example of Representative Lynn Cheney, a very conservative Republican. She, of course, thinks Trump is responsible for the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, and she's been ostracized from party leadership because of that. Is that really where you want to draw the line for good Republican, bad Republican?
No, not always. And I mean, let's face it. I mean, Liz Cheney is a conservative. When people are saying that she's a rhino or what have you, I mean, you don't see her voting record. Listen, I am not the biggest fan of Dick Cheney, his family, or even Liz Cheney with, what happened in terms of, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. But I wouldn't say that she's not a conservative.
So let's say you're in Congress on January 6th. Are you voting to accept the Electoral College votes from all 50 states, or you're picking and choosing like some did?
Honestly, Adam, we can keep talking hypotheticals, but I'm running in 2022. And I'm ready to move on past this. I mean, I wasn't in Congress January 6th. And this is, now I want to talk about my race and what's important in the races today. And I don't think that that's what's important to the voters of the United States and New Hampshire at the moment.
Well, we'll get to some of those issues, but I mean, this is something that was a pretty cataclysmic event that happened on January 6th. I think it's important that people know what you think about it. Would you have voted to accept the Electoral College votes from, say, a state like Arizona?
So again, we're talking hypotheticals, but are you asking me, did, Joe Biden win the election? Sure, he won the election. Do we have a lot of issues with voting across the country? 100%, especially here in the state of New Hampshire. Like, I don't agree that college students are able to just come here and vote the day that they show up, or that we've even had cases where college students didn't even show up here, weren't even living here, but they were sending absentee ballots. Now, unfortunately, our laws are open enough that people are allowed to do that. Do I agree with it? No, I don't agree with it. But did Joe Biden win the election? Yeah, he won the election.
Okay, let's get to some of those current issues. One of those, I think, and the one that you really want to drive in this race, and will certainly be a key aspect of this primary, is critical race theory. Do you think the general public, is not necessarily realizing how big of an issue this is for core base Republican voters?
I think the problem with this is in the name alone, like critical race theory. Republicans and Democrats both have different opinions of what it is. And I think the true core of the problem is, this sort of racist whitewashing of history that we're doing in America's school systems. As I've been kind of reading up on this, I found this interesting to read about this 1619 project. The first ironic part is it's based on an account from Jean Shaheen's great-great-great-great-grandfather, John Rolfe, witnessing these African slaves coming into the United States. But I think the key point here is it's kind of funny to me because it wasn't the first time African slaves came to the United States. It was almost 80 years before when Ponce de Leon colonized Florida, and the Spanish actually brought the first African slaves to the United States. And of course, slavery was happening in the United States long before colonization even happened here with Native Americans. So when you have school systems out there teaching and whitewashing history that slavery was invented in 1619 by white colonizers, it's just incorrect.
Do you think, though, there are schools in New Hampshire that are solely teaching the 1619 project? That's the aspect of this, that it has come to dominate education. Is that true?
As far as, are they teaching all the guidelines of the 1619 project and race theory? Probably not, but are they teaching aspects of it? And are we whitewashing and teaching incorrect history because it doesn't fit a social narrative that, the United States wasn't colonized by white people. The United States was colonized by the French, the Dutch, the Spanish, and the English, and that many of us came from other countries, say like Norway or Scotland and Ireland, that didn't colonize the United States. I think that is a problem in all our school systems.
How should the U.S. change its approach to China? Obviously, we have this tremendously lucrative business link, but there are certainly these other aspects of the relationship piling up between COVID-19 and also what's happening in the Xinjiang province with the Uyghurs. They're really problematic. So what should the United States be doing in relation to China?
Sure. Well, first thing, we need a level playing ground. So the last time I ran for Congress, one of my big issues was the supply chain. Now, back in 2018, nobody was talking about the supply chain, especially in pharmaceuticals where I work. Now it turned into a really huge topic, but we haven't done anything about it. The majority of our pharmaceuticals, or the active pharmaceutical ingredients, are still being produced in China, and the majority of the finished products are still being produced in India. We need to start moving this stuff back. And when I say a level playing field, we don't put the same regulations on food and pharma in China that we do in the United States. There isn't surprise inspections from the FDA. There's not OSHA showing up there to make sure that people aren't dying in their plants. And we just need a level playing ground. And as long as the Uyghurs go, or we're talking about, essentially slave labor, yeah, we should be banning products that are coming in here when we find out that slave labor is being used.
Violent crime is, of course, up across the nation. There's a lot of debate about what to do about this. So if you're in Congress, what kind of ideas and policies are you pushing to deal with that?
Well, I mean, first off, I'm pro-gun, Second Amendment. We see some of the lowest crime rates in states that have constitutional carry. Again, the last time I ran for Congress, one of my big issues was talking about a national reciprocity law where people can carry guns across state lines, some sort of maybe federal licensing system. But I think it's absolutely ridiculous that if, I accidentally cross into Massachusetts when I'm on 95 and I miss the exit for 101, I've committed a felony. And I think that, that's one place to start at, is that we have places like Chicago where only the criminals have guns.
Is the answer more police officers, though?
Not always. Sometimes it's just better training and better officers and different approaches. There's probably some communities that do need more police officers, but I'll tell you, I've never been to a Bedford town hall meeting and somebody says, hey, you know what? Bedford really needs more police in this town. But yeah, there probably are some communities where they've done this defund the police, and saying defund the police is absolutely ridiculous. Of course you need police. If you don't have police, you have anarchy. It would be like the same thing. I don't like tow truck drivers, but if we didn't have them, people would park wherever they wanted.
We got about a minute left here. I'm curious for your perspective on the future. So much of that, what we talked about, the loyalty to Trump, is part of what it means to be a Republican right now. Do you want to see him run for president in 2024?
Well, we're going to have to see what happens in 2024 and 2022. I mean, that's still a long ways away. And right now I'm focused on 2022. I'm still a supporter of Donald Trump. I was an early supporter in 2015. I think that there's very few people that are running for office right now in New Hampshire that can say that. So, we're just going to have to wait till that. But right now I'm focused on 2022, and he's not going to be on the ballot. I am.
Okay, Robert Burns, we'll see you out there on the campaign trail. Thanks for joining us on Close Up.
Thank you.
All right, and that wraps up this edition of Close Up New Hampshire. Thanks for watching.